Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday, the 13th of November, 2024, and I'm going to be talking about FEMA, who I've talked about many times. If you want to take a look at my videos on Rumble, Don189, and just their connections to events that happen, whether they seem to be there in advance sometimes, and or they're part of they're in location when doing training, even when there are real events that happen. And so before I get into that, I want to reiterate my points with discussions regarding Jaren and Zetetic Warrior. I hope that they move past this little feud they have. I'm not saying it's not little. But they're both incredibly brilliant men who have a lot of incredible content on social media. And I don't think either of them are shills or trolls or have any sinister or ulterior motives for sharing all the information they do. And I think it's been incredibly helpful to humanity. And so, because there's just like a bit of a differing view on certain aspects of what I believe to be a simulated reality or cosmos, in any case, it's not helping this community at all. And so even with Eric Dubé, there's there is a block there as well, unfortunately, and it's not by other people. It's Eric Dubé not wanting to fully invest himself in the flat Earth community, especially in the U.S. or in Canada, and not having interactions with people like Mark Sargent, Dave Weiss, and countless others, right? And that's only going to help our community if we can get along, because we're going to manifest this reality. Perception is reality. It's a strong group of people that I'm talking about right now. And so, like, I don't think that this is going to be further pushed into the mainstream narrative until people get to come together and find some kind of a resolution and just, I don't know, comes at this from the same friggin' side. Yeah, and so I just think that it would be more beneficial. But that is just me. Like, I'm thinking about like how we're supposed to be accessing our higher levels of consciousness, our higher level emotions, and things like anger. You know, these are the lower level vibrations, right? We should be coming from a place of empathy, compassion, courage, etc. And I'm not saying that they're not. I'm not saying that, but I'm just like, there just seems to be a rift, and yeah, they have a lot more in common than they have differences. And I understand where they're both coming from. So it's the argument about seeing a possible 24-hour sun in Antarctica, and if seeing that or not would completely destroy the flat Earth model. And so the arguments are that based on the models that are being represented now, there's no real frame of reference because there's no accurate enough depiction of this Earth plane out there, and that's for anyone, like globe earthers as well, right? Like I've talked about Robinson's projection map and Peterson's projection map, and where continents, complete land masses are inaccurately represented, like their sizes on these maps for various different reasons. And I do say that's the government in the U.S. that controls the data, the GPS coordinate, that data. And so anyway, so that's my so I understand that it would completely have people have to reconsider the Earth model. I do believe that this is an electromagnetic reality being projected on a flat plane of inertia, and I don't think that the sun's travel path negates the fact that we can see too far. Like I've said before, that water requires a container. That what we're calling gravity has been consistently debunked. For this downward acceleration of 9.8 meters per second squared, and how I say when we're defining the laws of physics, it's to me, it's my interpretation of it. It's not gravity, electrostatics, and these weak and strong nuclear forces. I believe that this is just electricity and magnetism at various pressures, temperatures, and densities, and again, this being a contained, pressurized, gaseous environment as well, which also means that the luminaries, including the sun and the moon, are smaller and closer than what we're being led to believe. And I also believe that there's cymatics and sonoluminescence, hot and cold fusion specifically, also involved in projecting this divine clock. And so yeah, I don't, like, I think that we have to see first of all, if Duffy is even willing to have Austin and Jen go, it's a lot of money, and again, it's going to likely, possibly completely debunk Duffy's globe Earth model, or the sun's travel path within this globular Earth model that he's still preaching. And so I don't know. That's a little more than a month away, and we'll see. And this is when the sun's travel path, in my interpretation of this Earth plane, it's on its furthest path away from the northern region, the North Pole area, for example, and traveling the Tropic of Capricorn circular ring, whatever you want to call it, and 23.4 degrees south latitude of the equatorial ring. This is a measurable distance, it's approximately 1,660 miles in distance. And so like my interpretation of that is that if what we're calling Antarctica and the South Pole, or Antarctica specifically, to be south of South America in that region there, my interpretation is that the sun would be traveling faster to have that average 24-hour hours in a day, like rotational path that it takes to get that 24-hour hour a day average, like I'm saying. So it would be a faster movement or travel path, and so I believe that to be an impossibility on this Earth plane, for there to be 3 days of a sun. Maybe people were misinterpreting it for for the moon, because I have shown that during that period of time, it's also convenient that that the moon, and again, obviously it depends on the its luminosity or its luminescence, right? If it's at a full moon or a new moon phase, but I'm saying like it does change throughout throughout the years. The full moon and the new moon are not how we're basing our calendar system now. It's not entirely accurate every single month. So for example, you don't have a full moon on the 29th of every single month. You don't have a new moon 2 weeks prior to that of every single month, right? And so during certain periods there is a full moon, and it is very visible in the sky during that time in Patagonia and those areas, and so again, like the further south of of South America, prior to traveling towards what we're calling Antarctica, which I believe to be possibly establishing some kind of a perimeter, maybe not completely enclosed, but like some kind of a perimeter with these ice shelves or walls, whatever you want to call it, assisting in, anyway, I was going to say containing these environments, but there's even like, anyways, there's possibility of there being more land as well. And that's another point I was going to say about maps being inaccurate because, and these could be misleading as well, but coming in from Asia from like over 100 years ago. And this is on the record where there's even like journalistic reports put out there in the US and about there being like land masses beyond what we're considering to be the Antarctic ring or perimeter, like lands beyond that. So who knows? Some people know. Oh my goodness, I want to talk about so many things. Yeah, I want to get into simulation theory a little bit, and the double slit experiment. I want to share that again because it's been a little while, and which reinforces my idea that this is some kind of a video game or simulation, motion picture, whatever you want to call it. But FEMA is doing a more further training exercises from the 17th to the 22nd of November. And I have dug deep into exactly what they're doing and the training programs, the schedule, etc. And I'm just going to go on my Brave connection. Is not private. I don't care. Yeah, there's so much I want to show you guys regarding their training exercises. But they involve Curry Mayor, former Training and Exercise Chief, Governor's Office of Emergency Services, CA. NIMS is a national structure that includes roles and responsibilities for responding to an incident. Actually, I'll share this with you. Why am I not sharing this with you? Oh, it is being shared. Perfect. Amazing. Okay. And so, and this is run out of California, which has like a very large population in comparison to the other states in the U.S. For people that don't know that, I am Canadian, so I do get like a lot of Canadian viewers as well. Anyway, it's also a system that provides common terminology, roles, and responsibilities so that everyone in the country can basically plug into the national system of response. You've got Christy Plord, Emergency Management Specialist, U.S. Coast Guard. And by the way, the Coast Guards, as we know, even though it's state level operated, the President of the United States can initiate them to be federal and to respond to natural man-made disasters. And so, very interesting. NIMS has helped us be better structured, have less duplication, be more organized and more efficient. And it covers the whole gamut of organization, communication, preparedness. It's everything. So really being pushed by the Coast Guards. Roberta Runge, National NIMS Coordinator, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. NIMS is a system that allows us to plan and prepare and execute a response more effectively with our response partners. The biggest benefit to us as an agency is to be able to understand how our response partners are going to be executing the response. EPA or EPA is a fairly large organization, but we hardly ever respond to something very large and very complicated without other federal and state and local partners. And so we can go into this. This is the basically the instructor manual or whatever. Anyway, I'm going to close this down unless there's other things I want to share. No, it's not letting me go. Oh, that's just funny. Attackers might be trying to steal your information from EMPA org AU. Interesting. The government wouldn't try to be taking my data, would they? Shocker. Okay. I do want to share the training because there are people that are sharing this as well. They're just not doing the whole gambit. Training partners. Radiological Emergency Preparedness Program. The Center for Homeland Defense and Security. Center for Domestic Preparedness, training the best for the worst. So this is a schedule that I was talking about before. From the 17th of November until 22nd, 2024. And these are the course programs. This is an overview. So what FEMA is giving us training. They're calling it law enforcement protective measures for complex incidents. But if you look at the target audience, this is their target audience: law enforcement or security personnel. And so, like I've said before, I've trained security personnel, and this is not they're great, but they don't have law enforcement training. They're not cops. They're not law enforcement. In some provinces, you don't even need a security guard license, but in some provinces, it's 40 hours of theory. Then you do a final exam, and then that's it. That is it. There's nothing else that you require unless you're going to be doing more advanced security with certain companies that require you have, for example, your restricted possession acquisition license, your RPAL or your PAL, or training in handcuffs and baton. You absolutely need to have that use of force certification, and then specify where, like there's baton training, that's one thing, and then there's handcuff training, that's another thing, and then obviously other weapons that are utilized on their belt, they need to be trained on, and certified to operate, and current. And there's also some, for example, that require you to have your first aid certifications, and it has to be current. And anyway, and the standard workforce safety stuff. But this concerns me because even with use of force, I trained like even the security guards at the LCBO, which is like the entire province of Ontario. Our main liquor store is the LCBO, and so I was like their use of force instructor. But during COVID, unfortunately, the company it's like had like significant losses in personnel, and there was just like a lot of issues because of how people wanted to freaking mandate us through fucking COVID. It just anyway, it was really ridiculous, and yeah, it made a so anyways the company went under. I was a contractor working with this company, and so it didn't impact me or my business, but it obviously impacted my clientele, right? And the training is like is a day, unless they agree now to do like a longer period, and they do have to get certified in use of force every year or 2 years, depending on what job you're doing. And but again, it's very low level. It's supposed to be in person. People are now doing this online. I said even from the beginning, I do not recommend that, and it's something I will do because because practice what you preach. And again, I lost money with that as well, but I don't believe that use of force training should be done online. And there are several people within this network, because it's a very small community, but they also agree, luckily. And so anyway, but there's like pressure point tactics. There's escort control, things like that. But there's no real like basic. But again, it's more defensive, and it's a heavy tactical de-escalation and tactical communications piece that is a more significant emphasis of this course, because at the end of the day, you don't want violence in the stores. Yeah. So it's very misleading on the target audience. But the prerequisites and the requirements, they're not even saying anything about that you having to show proof that you're law enforcement or a qualified security professional that's employed. So there's that as well, where you require this course. It says you need you need this course and you need this course. And let's see here, students must also be physically capable of completing all learning activities and exercises, which include the ability to function in PPE and stand for long periods, and the ability to move tactically as a member of a security or clearing team. I've conducted and trained for doing clearance drills. I was a fucking infantry officer, though. Oh my God. Ridiculous. Anyway. So there's that. I'm going to paste this in this browser. That's one of the courses being taught. 8 hours. The course is 8 hours for that. Got right here, the intermediate hands-on training for CBRNE incidents, law enforcement. It's even saying it in it. This is the HOTLEPER 313. Anyways, you could just go on the site yourself and just click every single one of these, and then see their future dates as well. Is the 9th of March, 5th of March. But intermediate hands-on training for CBRN incidents, law enforcement, HOTLE is a one-day course designed to give law enforcement officers confidence while operating in personal protective equipment, and to provide complex practice and the skills and abilities necessary to identify and safely respond to CBRNE incidents. So again, this is good training. This is great training, but I think that you need to be properly qualified and certified and verified before conducting this training. Again, this is here, target audience, law enforcement, and security personnel. And I know the background checks too, like not for the LCBO, they were great. Like it was really good staff at the top. And they work obviously with, because it's like, especially for critical incidents, they do work hand in hand with law enforcement. And I've gone to, I guess you would call it meetings, where I was speaking on behalf of my company that hired me, and also with the LCBO, and discussing areas of concern, and discussing again like the threat levels of the various LCBOs and how to mitigate and alleviate like the workload and the volume on law enforcement, and but then also like having anyway. There's just, and then with the arrests and detainments, that handover process making it a little more effective. And so all interesting stuff. And so they should be working hand in hand, but we should be a lot more cautious on vetting and in the hiring process. And yeah. Law enforcement response actions for CBRNE incidents. Again, it's 8 hours. Target audience, law enforcement and security personnel. Exceptions to any of the above prerequisites may be granted on a case-by-case basis at the discretion of the CDP register. So it just looks like all you need for this is to have the courses that they're giving, and they must be physically fit. Clear rooms, apprehend a suspect and extricate a victim or suspect from a building or room. And then what they're calling DART, but it's drone assessment and response tactics. Target audience, emergency management, emergency medical services, fire service, law enforcement. But there's no requirements or prerequisites, I mean. Interesting. So I can show more, but what I will do is finally get to the video regarding FEMA and this gentleman's concern. I did watch 18 and a half minutes.
Drill. It's the execution. Patriots, what I'm about to show you is terrifying. In the mainstream.
Oh, I'll give him a shout out for him first. The War Against You shared this. FEMA prepares for massive arrest of dissidents. Secret documents expose nefarious intent. This was posted yesterday. And I forget what this guy's name is. Anyway, it's
media won't touch it. 350 FEMA trucks deployed across 6 strategic Michigan counties. A military whistleblower confirming our worst fears. Training exercises involving 30,000 personnel for domestic operations. Yeah. Patriots, this is not a drill. It's the execution of a plan years in the making. The maps, the corridors, the staging areas, they all align perfectly with classified summer exercises. But here's what should really keep you up at night. Michigan is just the test run. And speaking of protection, let me tell you something that could save your life. With FEMA's concerning activities in Michigan, having evidence of what happens on the road is more critical than ever. That's why you need this military-grade dash cam. Captures everything, records suspicious federal movements, documents potential harassment, and provides irrefutable evidence of any encounter. Visit carvisionx.com and get free express shipping and several bonuses with every order during their current special. Don't wait until it's too late. Protect yourself and your family with the same technology used by law enforcement. Now we've got there's a lot to get into in this segment, so I want you to stay with me because we've got a lot of dots to connect. I got a concerning phone call today. Apparently somebody watched our report yesterday, and when we presented the maps in that report, you go on the channel, you can watch the report. They jumped off the couch. They made a phone call. They didn't realize that we had a mutual friend. And then I was presented with information. What we disclosed in our report yesterday and the map that we presented, I was told it mirrored the exact military map that they had used during their own military operation. So when you connect the dots, it's all related. So the evidence is here. So FEMA now, and now think about this in the context of the new DOD directive. Think about this in Jeremy Raskin's declaration that he's not going to be certifying the election, calling for civil war conditions. Like, this is the language of the left right now. that DOD directive, remember, it authorizes lethal force. Lethal force. And remember, it also, what just happened with FEMA? Remember? Well, that person at FEMA has now come out. And this is what's shocking. Before I get into the details of this thread that has gone completely viral, we posted it just a couple hours ago. It's already going viral. But I want you to put what I'm about to present to you in the context of everything that's happening now, including this.
So if you turned in reports to your supervisors that state political hostility for the people in the field, those reports exist.
Yes, hence why I also sent you screenshots where they're deleting files now from my computer. So FEMA says they fired me, but I still have access to the systems and their applications. And while I was in an interview yesterday, I noticed that my files were being deleted in my name, and I could not have been doing that while I was talking to Madison. So
this is the woman who was fired because she gave the directive to skip over any household that had a Trump sign in the hurricane response, FEMA's hurricane response. This shows malice and just outright hatred for Donald Trump supporters within FEMA itself. It is systemic. It is ingrained in the organization. And this woman who was fired, she's now basically blowing the whistle on everything that was happening there.
I was very well aware of the incidents that take place, not just with my crew, but with all of the crews in the state that's declared. And instead of just saying, hey, this is how we're going to mitigate it to protect our people, they decided to fire me and make sure Donald Trump knows that they are loyal to him because they fear retribution. The important thing is here, once we start seeing a trend, for example, if they just so happen to have these Trump campaign signs in front of their home, and that's the characteristic that's coming along with that, we have to proceed with precaution. So avoidance first and then de-escalation. And that's the thing. Our superiors know that. We have constant conversations about keep your people safe. If your people are uncomfortable, then just don't go.
So explain this to me, please. Explain this to me. Okay. So I'm just trying to understand what that means. So again, if I'm on a house, if I'm on a street and it has 20 homes and there are 8 homes on that street with Trump signs. Wow. And my team has faced hostility from 3 of the homes that have signs. What happens next?
Okay, before she gets to that, there was no reports of any hostility prior to that. None. He's throwing a hypothetical here.
I informed my TFL, my direct report, hey, we're again experiencing hostile encounters. We're moving on to another street. We're not canvassing those homes.
So again, only for go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And that's the directive too. Like, honestly, he has called me multiple times and says, your job is to keep the team safe.
I'm sorry, when you say he, who's he?
Oh, Chad Hershey.
Okay, who's Chad Hershey?
The TFL my assigned TFL for this deployment. So
Chad Hershey has told you what?
That if your team is uncomfortable and they do not feel safe, do not go to those homes. Go and canvass the other homes. Your job is to keep these people safe. They need to be able to go back home safe.
Okay, do you see what just happened here? She just outed her supervisor. So she's basically following orders like a good soldier. She's directing her underlings to skip Trump flagged houses. But the evidence now that she's declaring comes from the top, and it keeps getting higher. Who gave the initial directives for that? Okay,
but in her defense as well, and I've verified she does exist. She does or did work for FEMA, and Hershey. Sorry, it was Chad. Yeah, Chad Hershey Yeah, he is like someone that works with FEMA as well. So these are all verified. But like I think there's been so much hatred and misinformation that's being projected or spewed by the likes of Rachel Maddow that and Joy Reid, these friggin' racists, these deluded leftist extremists. They're causing so much hate and lies, blatant lies, and it's making people feel unsafe when they even see a Trump sign. This is what I mean. They're eliciting such a strong emotional response in people, and they're lying about it. These people need to be fired, but instead they're propped up on left-wing, crazy friggin' media that I hope finally gets canceled. And I hope they don't get hired again to have a platform to keep on lying to people. Same thing for Piers Morgan, who just got called out by Candace Owens again, which was hilarious. He has no idea what he's talking about. And he was trying to shame her. And she has more degrees than he does. And it means nothing. She was saying that like the longer some people do spend in academia, the more brainwashed and indoctrinated they become. And it makes more sense too, because you're only getting success and passing when you're pushing the narrative that the professors or the heads of the departments want you to push. And I'll say I know that from experience as well. This is not a brag at all, but I was friggin' top in my class at RMC. I was awarded the top Army officer, sorry, the top Army cadet award in my 4th year. I was given it by Hillier. I have a photo of that for proof. And I was one of 2 cadets selected to go to West Point on exchange. And so I decided through COVID to go back and get another degree. It was a science degree that I wanted to get. And trying to discuss things with my science professors, because I wasn't vaccinated, I was not allowed to even enter the campus. So I had to do it all online, and I would send emails, but I would give data and cite my references and provide dissertations and theses that they weren't even looking at because they refused to even look at what I was sharing. And I'm talking about the shape of the earth stuff as well, and archaeological stuff, evolutionary stuff. And they were teaching the scientific revolution, and I called it a scientific de-evolution in one of my essays. And again, citing my references and refused to look at my work. And so in my 4th year, I ended up, for so many different reasons, not deciding to not complete my degree, because I was at Carleton University is very woke right now, and they're being run. And the people that are at the top, I know for a fact, even on the committees and panels, are leftist radicals. And they're getting their funding from leftist radicals, unfortunately, and rightist radicals, but people that are radical and they're pushing a bullshit agenda. And anyways, and so he was trying to say that because she didn't have a journalism degree, that she wasn't as good as him at reporting news, which is laughable because he's been wrong about almost literally everything, including COVID. And Candace Owens has been right, okay? And she's looking into the Earth model more. She's, I think, like a full blown, just like myself, denying the moon landings because they did not happen. And yeah, and it's just like saying, like the examples are given, other examples of how ridiculous that sounds. But for me, it's even like, well, that's like saying that like you can only cook or have the authority to cook if you have like a chef certification. You know, it's just nonsensical to me. And even myself, like I don't have a journalism degree, but I'm definitely more educated than Piers Morgan, and with a lot more experience in the real world under my belt. And so I've also been right where he's been incredibly wrong. And I'm sharing medical, scientific, and government data to back up my claims. And he's just showing fucking weird guests and trying to exploit their mental health conditions. Anyway.
What I'm about to present to you, these are all very important points that I'm getting to. We have to build the backstory before I reveal what I found out on a phone call today. Okay. Now remember Jeremy Raskin. You've seen this clip, but we have to play it again. Jeremy Raskin, by the way, they just came out and said, "Oh, this is fake." He's got the media running cover for him for his own statements right here. But he said them. And you can't deny it. Oh, this clip's going viral. Well, it's because what you said, Jeremy, is so outrageous. And now he's trying to backpedal somehow. But no, the internet lives forever, and so do your words.
War condition efficient because what can be put into the Constitution can slip away from you very quickly. And the greatest example going on right now before our very eyes is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which they're just disappearing with a magic wand. as if it doesn't exist, even though it could not be clearer what it's stating. And so, they want to kick it to Congress. So it's going to be up to us on January 6, 2025 to tell the rampage.
Okay, I just want to share. It's Jerry Franchi.
Trump mobs
Gary French
that he's disqualified, and then we need bodyguards for everybody in civil war conditions, all because the 9 justices, not all of them, but these justices who have not many cases to look at every year, not that much work to do, a huge staff, great protection, simply do not want to do their job and interpret what's efficient because.
Okay, so civil war conditions, raging Trump mobs because he intends to not certify the election. We have FEMA supervisors pointing out to skip Trump homes for emergencies. So we're building the case that we have already. Okay? And there's more. Let's go to see what Ron Paul had to say here.
Authorized to kill U.S. military now is authorized to kill Americans on U.S. soil. Send in the troops. We need you to shoot a couple of these people. Yeah. They're opposing our policies. They're demonstrating against COVID rules or something they'll come up with. So I think it's very, very dangerous. And hopefully people wake up. Maybe people will say, well, this was just a political stunt for the campaign or something like that to act tough. But I tell you what, sometimes they come up and nobody warned us that they were going to do this. It wasn't discussed in the Congress, and it's been sitting there. The main thing that most people should have known about is that you're not supposed to use the federal military to enforce laws.
Yeah.
Okay. So we got the DOD directive, we got Raskin, the Democrat plan to disqualify the Trump victory, civil war conditions he's declaring. We have FEMA making their declaration, their case known that they hate Trump supporters. They're willing to go past their homes in an emergency situation. House Speaker Mike Johnson and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries are at each other's throats over which party can truly be trusted to certify the 2024 election. That's according to Axios. Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. Okay? We can come back to Judge Joe Brown in a minute on this because he had some thoughts on that DOD directive. And we have Elijah Schaefer also covering this for Vigilant News. But this is the actual directive. If you haven't seen it, this is the actual directive that has been published by the Department of Defense. Okay? There it is. DOD directive expands domestic military authority to include lethal force. Here it is. Lethal force, including death. Okay? So this is all the backstory for what I'm about to present to you. Okay? FEMA now deploying 350 plus trucks across 6 Michigan counties. The situation just got darker. A member of the United States military has corroborated maps posted online with their own from the operation. It's not speculation. This has now been verified. The FEMA staffer, who was recently fired for advising other workers to avoid houses with Trump signs in Florida, claims that FEMA took the same stance in North Carolina, and she blames the practice on political hostility from Trump supporters. Now let's dive deeper into this thread. 130,000 views on this thread, 425 reposts, going viral. Now, the operation was initially classified as top secret, was downgraded to unclassified earlier this year. Conducted in the summer of 2024, the operation wasn't just a drill, it was dissent-related training involving federal agencies. Now these plans are in motion.
I don't disagree with that, like especially like military and law enforcement doing this training. Like I don't disagree with this at all. I think it's necessary to be done because again, like we need to have like a strong, effective governing body, with significantly less authority and control than they do. And I would just like it if people at the friggin' top, the ones that are leading these operations and these at the strategic level I'm talking about, not the tactical level even, but at the strategic operational level, to understand or realize what they're possibly getting these people involved in. Like I was even talking about like the war in Afghanistan, for example, in Iraq. We were lied to about why we were going over, what we were doing. We were lied to about the reasons, again, why we got involved in that fucking war to begin with. And we lost people, and people in those countries lost a lot of people as well. And 9/11 was a staged and planned event with deep state and foreign international actors that were involved. And yeah. And so if people don't know things like that and like what really happened with January 6th, because there are people like Nancy Pelosi who was involved in staging and planning the January 6th event, by the way, then people are not going to understand like the full, like the fog, like they're still going to be in the fog of war. It's unfortunate. And I've offered to speak to the highest levels of our special forces as well, people that I've worked with and know, who I will not name, obviously. And because of what I'm saying, they don't want to have any part of it, because I don't know why. Cognitive dissonance. I mean, and if you're not able to accept the truth and see the facts, then you shouldn't be in the position that you're in. And so Gonzo Johnny, I think his name is, from he just sent a video from Mark Passio. You can love him or hate him. He does share good content. I don't agree with everything he shares, obviously, but order followers. Again, I'm just winging this video anyways. And I do get really good content from people that listen in, and emails of good content as well. So the Mark Passio archive. Let's see what he has to say about order followers.
People who keep the system of slavery in place. Okay, they're the people who keep the system of slavery in place. Let me just say this again. Order followers are the people who keep the existence of slavery in place. Not the ruling class, not the masters, not the so-called elite, which aren't the elite of anything but the bottom of a trash can. Okay? The people who keep slavery in place are the people who willfully follow their orders. Nobody wants to hear that. And people will hate you for saying it. Mm-hmm. Following orders means, by definition, doing what you are told to do without judging for yourself whether or not that action that you are being ordered to carry out is actually right or wrong. That's the definition of following orders. I mean, can anybody refute that?
I know, at least in my career as an infantry officer over 15 years, we're taught like that there's lawful and unlawful orders. But were people looking at investigating events on the ground, like the macro and the micro events, as much as they should have? I'm going to say absolutely not.
Not the actual definition of following someone else's order. By definition, you're not, if you're following the order, you're given the order and then you just act. You just do it because you're following the order. You don't sit there and go, is what that person told me to do right? Do I have a right to do that? Is that moral? Should I do that because, it's okay and it doesn't hurt somebody?
And there is a difference between lawful and moral.
Else, or should I not do that because it actually does cause harm? It's not what an order follower does in their mind. An order follower says, yes, sir, and follows the order. That's why it's called an order follower. That's why it's called following an order. So that's the definition of what an order follower is. It's not my perception of what an order follower is. It's the actual definition of order following. Okay? If an individual, this is key to understand, if an individual is performing the task of following orders, by definition, that individual cannot be exercising conscience. Since, by definition, exercising conscience means that one is willfully choosing through their free will for themselves right action over wrong action. So the concept of following orders is completely polar opposite to the concept of exercising conscience. You cannot be doing the same things simultaneously. It's impossible to do those two things simultaneously. They are contradictions in terms by definition. Okay, most people don't grasp that. Okay, by definition, if you're following orders, you cannot be actually exercising conscience, which involves free will choice based on the knowledge of right and wrong. Here's what order following gets us as far as a nation is concerned. You know, not that we're not already there, not that these people already didn't take us, because we're taken by them already covertly. They took us through the school systems. They couldn't beat us militarily. So they said, well, let's send our ideologues over there and get into the minds of their children. And if you don't believe that's what happened, you're very, very, very naive. Not only the Nazis, but the communists as well. Because really, it's all just forms of socialism. That's what feudalism is. Worldwide socialism is, there's no such thing as private property. State owns everything. Rights don't exist. Property.
The Nazi Party was considered to be, and originally was, a socialist party.
Rights don't exist. Everybody's a feudal serf again. It's called neo-feudalism. I don't care which branch you come at it from. You want to come at it from the left, that's called communism. You want to come at it from the right, that's called National Socialism. Communism, international socialism. They're both the same force. It's called feudalism. Let's just call it what it is. It's called feudalism, which is in itself just another euphemism for slavery. They want neo-feudalism, which is the new world order of slavery. Okay? And it's already here. It's not something that's coming. It's here now. The object is to get out of it. This is the result.
Novus Ordo Seclorum. I've talked about it. I think I was one of the first people to talk about it, not only on Elon Musk's jacket during like a gala event. So I think it was some kind of a charity event. But then also he posted a picture with him and Trump after he won, and it said Novus Ordo Seclorum, which in some groups possibly means New World Order.
Result of following orders. That's what following orders gets a society. Following orders should never be seen as a virtue. Following orders is evil. I don't care whether you're, I don't care if somebody who is considered a holy man gives me an order and I follow it, I've just committed an act of evil, as far as I'm concerned. If I'm acting based on solely what somebody else has told me to do, that's evil. There's no morality in it at all, at all, at all. It's not a virtue. It's evil. Okay? Let me just make that so abundantly clear and state it so unequivocally. There's no such thing as any possible moral following of orders. The two terms are contradictory. All right? I was just following orders is never a valid excuse or justification for immoral criminal behavior, and this lame attempt to abdicate personal responsibility should never be accepted as a valid excuse for such behavior. And why it's done is through justification. And again, that means to create a right, from jus, meaning right or law, and the Latin verb facere, which means to make or to create. And this is what they say. I was just following orders. I was just doing my job. I was shutting down your protest. You don't have a right to speak. The politicians commanded me so. So I just came out and I was just doing my job, hitting you with a sound cannon. You know, just doing my job, just following my orders. It's a justification. You're a criminal. There's nothing moral in that. There's nothing virtuous in that. It's called criminal behavior, criminal activity. And what they do is try to create it into a right, make it into a right by a justification. And nobody should ever accept their justifications. Because you know what their justifications is? You know what they are? It's called a 100% crock of bull that is a complete lie. It's a lie. They're just straight up looking you in the face and saying, I'm not responsible for that. I just did it, but I'm not the one who's responsible for it because I was acting on orders. Well, see, this defense didn't work as the Nuremberg defense, and nobody in America should be accepting it. Nobody in America should be accepting it because they believe in the legitimacy of authority and government through mind control. That's what they believe it. They believe there's legitimacy to it. Most people actually believe that there's legitimacy to this criminal behavior because a class of people calling themselves government have magically been imbued and gifted with such rights, quote unquote. They believe they have rights other people don't. They themselves believe it, but worse is that the people who are actually affected by that criminal behavior, they believe they have the authority to do it. Gandhi said, you assist an evil system most effectively by obeying its orders and decrees. An evil system never deserves such allegiance. Allegiance to it means partaking of the evil. A good person will resist an evil system with his or her whole soul, which means saying no.
That was good.
This is what the dark occultists do.
Yeah, that was really good. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, he comes up with some friggin' great stuff sometimes. And it's all relative to the topic. Because then it's people doing it.
Revealed that the operation trained over 30,000 individuals nationwide in its purpose to prepare government forces for the arrest of American citizens and their detention in undisclosed locations. It's not a conspiracy. It is documented.
It's a fact.
And this is an actual photograph that I got from the Department of Defense. Don't believe me? See if you can see this. You can't. If you go to the thread, click on Alt. It's a really long thread, but if you click on Alt, I made sure that I cited exactly who took the photograph. This one was taken by Specialist Cherish Little of the 326 Mobile Public Affairs Detachment. Now, the counties involved in Michigan, Eaton, Ingham, Ionia, Kent, Livingston, and Macomb, were chosen as part of a nationwide federal corridor. The routes align perfectly with Racine, Wisconsin, and FEMA is now executing a plan drawn directly from the operations maps. Okay, so here is the counties that are in question. Now, the operation was not theoretical. Its maps outline scenarios involving mass arrests, transport routes, and detention zones. FEMA's deployment of trucks and equipment in Michigan mirrors these plans exactly, according to our military source. Now, I had a very long conversation with our source today. And when they saw the map that we presented on our program, when we covered this yesterday, they freaked out because they said it mirrored exactly what their map, their official unclassified map for their operation showed. Now, here's what gets interesting. So as I dug deeper, because I needed to corroborate this story, I'm like, okay, here we have this whistleblower. I got him on the phone. They're explaining these things to me. And I'm like, well, they're like, we can't say this. We can't say that. We can't. I'm like, well, I got to give me something here. Give me something to bite onto. So they threw out some keywords to me. I did some searching. I did some investigating. And lo and behold, I was able to corroborate everything that the whistleblower was saying on the public-facing Department of Defense Public Relations website. Okay? So it happened in the summer of 2024. Training was explicit. The government practiced suppressing dissent. Here's a photograph of that operation. Right there. That's a public relations photograph. Now, again, if you go to the thread, click on Alt, I literally copied from the website the description and put it on this. So the evidence is right there. There can be no argument. The government practiced suppressing dissent. This included the simulated arrest of American citizens who opposed federal policies. FEMA is now implementing the logistical groundwork laid during the exercise. Oscoda, Michigan, a decommissioned airbase, was identified during the operation as a key logistical hub. FEMA has now turned it into a staging area, deploying hundreds of trucks and resources. This is not a disaster prep. It is federal mobilization. This is the decommissioned airfield. Now, this is the map that we presented on the program last night. This is the map that set off our whistleblower who came forward when they saw this. And particularly, what they saw was the arrows going across Lake Michigan. Because on their map, they had the exact same arrows explaining it all. That's what freaked them out. They saw the map. They said, wait a second. So this is somebody posted this on X. They did their own research, their own work. They drew the connections themselves based on open source intelligence. And they came up with this. And it lined up exactly with the whistleblower's own map. Okay. The operation involved military-grade logistics, including the coordination of routes, detention facilities, and staging points. Our source confirmed that FEMA's actions in Michigan are following the exact blueprint. The maps do not lie. Here's more. This is from that exercise. Military training at Fort McCoy during the summer of 2024 under CSTX, which is a combat support training exercise, further corroborates this U.S. Army Reserve soldiers. They trained for detaining citizens and riot suppression. This ties directly to FEMA's Michigan actions. So this is what they were practicing this summer. CSTX at Fort McCoy, documented with federal photos. These are actual federal Department of Defense photos. Involve scenarios of angry citizens. I mean, that's literally what it says on the caption on the Department of Defense website. Angry citizens and notional riots. The training emphasized preparing soldiers to engage with protesters, mirroring FEMA's mass detainment logistics in Michigan. We've recently exposed FEMA's history of politicizing disaster relief, including directives to avoid homes with Trump flags. What we're seeing now in Michigan is the next step in a much larger plan targeting dissenters. New York Times coming out with this, Trump's false claims about the federal response to Hurricane Helene. And then they had to come out with this. FEMA fires employee for telling Milton relief workers to skip homes with Trump signs. The hostility is baked in. 30,000 personnel participated in the training, according to our source, with the explicit purpose of learning how to detain American citizens during periods of unrest. The coordination between FEMA and other federal agencies is undeniable, my friends. This is real. This is another photograph from that operation. Again, don't believe me? Go to the X thread, see it yourself, click on Alt. You'll see exactly what I pasted from the Department of Defense, their own caption. Now, here's where it gets interesting. There's speculation about underground routes and strategic sites like ferry systems. That was one point that was brought up on the phone call. Ferry systems and air bases suggesting further coordination. Facilities along Lake Michigan and connected transportation routes were positioned for controlled access during federal mobilizations. Now, this map shows you all of the federal locations around Lake Michigan. These are all federal ports. And quite specifically, the map that we showed you with the arrows going across, and then our whistleblower's map showing the same arrows going across, it lines up with federal ports, federal ferry ports. The staging of 350 trucks is just the beginning. FEMA's deployment involves heavy equipment, supply chains, and transport logistics. These are not the tools of disaster relief. They are the tools of a government preparing for confrontation. Now, this is an artistic representation of those vehicles. The media is responding now. Escoda's Air Base wasn't chosen at random. During the operation, it was identified as a critical hub for detention logistics. FEMA is now using it exactly as planned, turning the site into a central point for their operation in Michigan. Now, this was posted. This is from the Detroit Times, the Detroit News. And, of course, they want you to say that they're going to, oh, no. No immediate plans to use Escoda Wurtsmith Airport as emergency staging area. I wanted to make sure I highlighted those points. No immediate plans to use the airport. And then at the bottom, You can't really see it. It says, oh yeah, there you go. It says there is no guarantee the site will ever be used. Yeah, a lot of qualifiers there. And then we have this. Local reports claimed Escoda was an unused migrant housing site, but the evidence points to broader federal purposes, including FEMA's deployment of trucks and equipment. The disconnect between federal actions and local oversight raises serious questions. Listen to this local report.
The facility has been in the works for several weeks now. The facility was originally slated as a migrant facility for children and teens who cross the border without their parents, but no children ever stay there. Mayor Nancy Bond was the one who came up with the idea for FEMA to take over and possibly house Helene victims. But the city says FEMA staff will train and process there. This will include FEMA's teams assisting with recovery efforts across the state. The city of Greensboro says it has no oversight or involvement with the use of this facility.
So no oversight. Isn't that convenient? CSTX exercises included notional arrests and riots at Fort McCoy, training troops for large-scale detentions. These same tactics are now seen in FEMA's Michigan operations. The overlap between the military and FEMA's plan is undeniable. More Department of Defense public relations photographs. Again, we bring up the map. The proximity of these operations to Lake Michigan and Racine, Wisconsin suggests deeper coordination. Underground routes, waterways, and strategic transport links all point to an overarching plan. This is federal level control at its most alarming. Michigan is a test run. FEMA's operations in these 6 counties are setting the stage for similar actions nationwide. The corridors, staging areas, and equipment are a template for federal control on an unprecedented scale. What you're seeing there on the screen are the counties that have been selected. The Biden administration's silence is deafening. FEMA's actions, shrouded in secrecy, are being carried out with no public accountability. The alignment with the operations maps confirms this is a planned, coordinated effort. The maps show more than routes. They reveal intent. Here's another photograph. FEMA's use of corridors and staging areas mirrors military exercise that trained personnel to suppress dissent and detain citizens. The operation has moved from training to execution. White hats inside the federal government have flagged the operation as alarming. Internal dissent confirms that FEMA isn't acting alone. This is a federal operation designed to centralize control under the pretext of preparation. Every truck, every staging area, every route has been planned for years, and FEMA is not improvising. They're executing a federal strategy. The maps from the operation are a blueprint, and Michigan is the testing ground. The silence from the mainstream media is, of course, intentional. FEMA's actions in Michigan are happening under the radar while the public is distracted by other narratives. And the truth is in the maps and the corroboration from our military source. Now, Michigan's not the only state involved. Underground systems tied to federal facilities and ferry routes hint at nationwide network for transport and detention. The coordination is extensive and troubling. Again, here is an image of all the federal harbors on the Great Lakes. Now, this is all on my X account. You want to go look at the pictures more in detail. I know this is difficult to see. Just go check it out for yourself. Community leaders and local governments, except one, have remained silent on the scope of federal actions. FEMA's presence has raised local concerns, but the broader implications of these operations remain unaddressed by authorities. Listen.
Services through the airport was just notified that FEMA has chosen the airport facility as a stationing hub for emergency services through FEMA. They will be serving 6 counties in this area, and they will be bringing in some 350 semi-trailers with equipment to park on the base. So if you see a lot of trucks coming into the base, that's what it is. It's nothing to get scared about. They're staging for emergency situations in any of these 6 counties that FEMA takes care of. And, the airport was just
emergency. What emergency? What possible emergency could they be preparing for? An inauguration? a revolt when they don't certify an election. I mean, the operation that we just shared with you so far clearly shows that they are training to arrest American citizens, rioters, protesters. Yeah, that's what it is. That's what we're showing. 30,000 government personnel were trained to arrest and detain American citizens. The deployment of resources in Michigan is a direct result of that training. It's not relief, it's preparation for federal control under the guise of an emergency. My goodness. CTX exercises prepared the soldiers for engaging with angry citizens, riot suppression, and notional detentions. FEMA's actions now mirror this military training exactly. This was never about readiness for natural disasters. A SCOTA initially intended for migrant housing is now being used for federal staging. The sudden shift in purpose, confirmed by our source, proves this operation is about more than disaster relief. It's about controlling dissent. The operation was not a drill. It was a rehearsal. FEMA is using the exact plans, routes, and staging areas from that operation to mobilize now. The deployment of 350 plus trucks in Michigan proves the plan has been activated. Our military source didn't just corroborate the maps, they confirmed the operation's purpose. It's not about saving lives or responding to disasters. It's about federal agencies preparing to suppress dissent and centralize control. Facilities near Lake Michigan are positioned for controlled access, and the corridors tie directly into the broader federal logistics. It's not isolated, it's systemic planning for federal mobilization under emergency pretense. And Michigan's only the beginning. The playbook being used now will expand nationwide if it's not stopped. FEMA's actions are a warning sign of what is to come, and the American people need to wake up before it's too late. The alignment of FEMA's actions with CSTX's military training is no coincidence. This is a coordinated, planned effort to extend federal power, the maps, the movements, and the...
Excuse me. Sorry, I was offline because I made myself some organic eggs, and I cut up some organic vegetables like mushrooms and red and yellow peppers, some salt and pepper, and baked bread. Okay, let me see here. This was shared. Update FEMA staging in Muskota, Michigan, 15 hours ago by the Needy Homesteader. I just wanted to take a look at William Palmer, aka Bill Palmer. Let's see what he has to say.
I'm going to apologize for any kind of glare. I'm going to try to not be so glary. But first and foremost, I'm going to show you.
From the 28th of October of this year.
So this is a SCOTA meeting. I know I read the transcript, but this was the only piece of evidence that I had to go by, which is what Mr. Palmer, Mr. Bill Palmer here had said. I could only go by his words, what he said. He was my trusted source. Okay, so let's play what he said.
The airport was just notified that FEMA has chosen the airport facility as a stationing hub for emergency services through FEMA. They will be serving 6 counties in this area, and they will be bringing in some 350 semi-trailers with equipment to park on the base. So if you see a lot of trucks coming into the base, that's what it is. It's nothing to get scared about. They're staging for emergency situations in any of these 6 counties that FEMA takes care of. And Mr. Freeman is in the house. Yeah, that's perfect. And just one other item from the airport, they are working on the paperwork to submit for the grant to build a terminal at the airport. So that you saw perspective pictures of what it would look like, and it will be fantastic. Yep. It'll be slightly smaller than what we have now, but it'll be a beautiful building. So it's
so we're going to have a big, new, beautiful building with a bunch of semi-trailers parked behind it, huh?
well, sometimes it'll be a ways away from the terminal.
Fair enough.
Okay, so you heard him say these 350 semi-trucks were coming in to stage for an emergency in the 6 counties that they were going to be taking care of. At the end, you hear them talk about a grant to build on to the airport, in which case this gentleman, I'm so sorry, don't know his name, laughed and said, well, we're going to have this big, beautiful building at the airport that's going to be blocked by 350 FEMA trailers, at which case Mr. Palmer corrected him and said, no, we're going to have, the FEMA trucks will be parked a ways back. This is what I went on when I made my video. This was the only piece of evidence that I could find on FEMA coming in to the Oscoda area, okay? Now, I say this why? Because people were asking, well, what do you want? What do you want? What do you expect? If something, an emergency happens, FEMA has to park their equipment somewhere. They need some kind of storage facility. True. And I would not oppose that, in fact. I mean, if that is what we were discussing, but that was not discussion. That was not part of the discussion here. What was being discussed was 350 FEMA trailers coming in and staging for an emergency with the 6 counties that they were going to be taking care of locally. And then he tells us not to be scared when we see them rolling in. There was no talk of, again, you want to talk about fake news, you can't project and think in your mind. I can only go by what I hear. And at no point was it mentioned that, hey, they're only using the airport to store their emergency supplies. They didn't even mention emergency supplies. They said equipment. 350 semi-trailers with equipment. That's what they said. You can only go by what was said. Now, so after my video, the next morning, I got some texts about the Tawas Exchange making a post on my video. There was also a link to Facebook with our state representative, Mike Hoadley, and he had made a post about it. Now, I can't read you the current post that is showing because this is an edited post. And Mr. Hoadley might not be on social media, so he might not be used to the standard. Now, standard practice of anybody who works on social media knows that when you make an edit, you always let your audience know that you have edited the original text. I'm going to show you in Facebook land, at least, how to tell if somebody has edited a post. Because as you see, if you're looking at his post here, you don't see anything that says edited. Unlike, like sometimes on different message boards or different things, I want to say like Instagram, if you go in and edit a comment, it'll say edited. I think they do that too on YouTube. But you can't see anywhere that this is edited. So this is an edited response. So we're just going to read this because this is what's up currently and what looks to be original, but it is not. So I woke up to State Representative Mike Hoadley's post. Okay, so let's read what, if you go to Facebook, this is what you're going to see. Our office has received several calls from concerned citizens regarding plans of FEMA bringing approximately 350 semi-trailers onto the old Worth Smith Air Force Base in Oscoda, Michigan. We have reached out to FEMA for an official response, however, have been told that the site was considered in possible collaboration and contract with Kalita Air to be an emergency response hub for FEMA. The air base was among the chosen due to the available space needed and Kalita's capability as one of the world's largest air freight carriers with experience in rapid deployment with the U.S. government. To clarify any misunderstanding, these trailers are not there now, not en route, not scheduled to be delivered. We will continue to monitor the situation and relay more information as it becomes available. That is what you're going to see now. However, I had a question for him, and you will see my response down below, because he had edited it without telling people that he edited his verbiage. And then I posted the original post. Now, I'm going to teach you, in case you didn't know, on Facebook, how you can tell if an original post has been edited. You're going to go up to these three little dots up here, and you're going to click on it. And then right here, you're going to click on View History. And then what will pop up is the history, okay? And you will see that Mr. Hoadley edited his post 3 times. So his original post was at 9:31 a.m.
2 edits.
His first edit was 3:32 p.m. and then he edited again at 3:37 p.m. And Mr. Hoadley, no shade to you, I have to edit all the time because I speak in fluent typo. So it's not a big deal. However, to be transparent, especially when you are a public figure, it's just really nice to be able, especially when you're dealing with something like this, where transparency is so important. It's nice to be able to tell your audience, hey, I'm editing this post or edited to update something. Let them know that you're editing it. Otherwise, it just appears shady. Okay, so let's look at his original post, which is the post that I read when I woke up that morning. Okay, our office has received several calls from concerned citizens regarding plans of FEMA bringing approximately 350 semi-trailers onto the old Fort Smith Air Force Base in Oscoda, Michigan. We have reached out to FEMA for an official response, however, have been told that the site was chosen in collaboration and contract with Kalita Air to be an emergency response hub for FEMA. The air base was chosen due to the available space needed. Now we're going to go down, okay? And I'm going to show you where the edit is, right here. However, have been told that the site was considered in possible collaboration. However, have been told that the site was chosen in collaboration. Do you see how that verbiage on those 2 posts are completely different? There is a huge difference between the site has been chosen versus the site was considered in possible collaboration. That is night and day to me. That's a huge difference. And so you will see I will leave links. So I will leave links to everything because everything we do here is in the light. So I asked him, and you see I've got 10 thumbs up. I asked him about, you want me to read this? I don't want to make this video too long for you. The morning you said, Mr. Hoadley, I am now confused. Sorry, I was confused. This morning you stated that the site was chosen in collaboration. Now I see you edited your post without stating that you edited your post to, quote, was considered in possible collaboration. That's a huge difference. So are you saying, like Mr. Palmer, and we're going to get into Mr. Palmer in a minute, is now stating that you misspoke in your original post this morning? I'm asking for transparency so there is no confusion. Thank you in advance for any help that you can offer to get this all sorted out. You know, you should have edited your post and said, I'm sorry, I used the wrong verbiage. I'm sorry, I misspoke. I'm sorry, I got the wrong information. To me, you said, we have reached out to FEMA for an official response. However, have been told, okay, I need to know, we need to know as a community, who told you what? However, have been told that the site was considered in possible collaboration. Well, we know that it said that your original, because we're going to go back to that in history, and we're going to go back to click it all. We have reached out to FEMA. However, we have been told that the site was chosen. So what I want to know is who told you it was chosen. If Mr. Palmer genuinely misspoke and said the wrong things in that township meeting, then who told you this that morning when you called? I'd like to know. I have questions. I know I'm not the only one. All right, so we're going to get to Dave Bondi. Let me see. Can I back you up a little bit? Yeah. So here's Dave Bondi, and I will leave a link to this as well so you can go read. FEMA and Oscoda, Michigan staging area social media post. Again, I did not think that this would get this big. I did not think I was going to go viral with this. All right, so He says that social media post has gone viral, has a lot of people asking questions about FEMA in Oscoda, Michigan. The post states that FEMA is staging 350 trailers and equipment at an Air Force base in Oscoda, Michigan. The Air Force base was decommissioned in the 90s. It's for emergency services. A video also posted online showing Oscoda Township official talking about this in a recent meeting, saying FEMA was possibly coming to Wordsmith. I reached out, so this is what Dave Bundy says. I reached out to FEMA for explanation, and they released the following statement. So I'm going to try to zoom in here. Again, I'll leave the link to this so you guys can read it yourself. I don't want you to go by what I say. I want you to research it yourself. I think it's supposed to say FEMA. FEMA routinely assesses the viability of sites that may be used in future disasters. There is no plan to use Wordsmith location to stage commodities at this time. We have no trailers at the location or on the way. This is an unfortunate misunderstanding. Oscoda Township Manager Bill Palmer released the following statement. Now, this is the gentleman that we saw at the beginning talking at the township meeting. I misspoke at the board meeting when I said FEMA was sending 350 semis to Wordsmith. What I meant to say was Wordsmith was being, quote, considered as a secure location along with 5 other possible locations for this secure staging of FEMA equipment. This would simply be a staging area for FEMA to cover some 6 counties in northern Michigan, as I understand, in case of an emergency or disaster of some kind. However, at this time, no decision has been made by FEMA to my knowledge, and I have no idea why FEMA is considering this possible action. Well, FEMA, right up here, pretty much said that there is no plan to use Wordsmith location to stage at this time. So there's no plan to use them. Here he mentions the 6 counties in northern Michigan. This whole talk about 6 counties being, including like Macomb, Ionia, I can't remember the other one. I don't know where that came from, and nobody can source it other than an anonymous source leaked 6 counties that kind of line up with Wisconsin, I believe an Air Force base in Wisconsin. That's all hearsay. I have no evidence or proof of any of that. All I know is what my leaders are telling me, what my elected officials are telling me. And my elected official is saying 6 counties in northern Michigan. Many of you ask me, what 6 counties? Heather, what 6 counties? What 6? I don't know. They have.
So she goes on. This is a good video. I'm not going to share the whole thing because I still want to carry on with FEMA and assimilation theory.
Secrecy all point to a chilling conclusion. Local and federal mismatches in communication are intentional. Oscoda and other sites have been reframed as disaster housing or migrant facilities, but the reality is far more concerning. FEMA is preparing for unrest, not relief. Community leaders downplaying the secrecy of operations and the alignment with military exercises are a clear signal that FEMA's actions in Michigan are setting a precedent that this is a test for large-scale federal overreach. Speculation of underground tunnels and hidden logistics is not baseless. Military coordination and strategic site positioning confirm a deeper federal strategy. The corridors in Michigan are part of a nationwide blueprint. The truth is undeniable. FEMA's operation in Michigan is the blueprint for federal overreach. The maps, the corroboration from our military source, the staging of resources all point to one conclusion. This is a coordinated plan for control. And what's happening in Michigan will not stop there. FEMA's actions are testing the limits of federal control under the guise of emergency preparation. The maps and operations confirm this is a trial run for larger actions. So share this thread, demand answers. The maps, military corroboration, CSTX training, and FEMA's actions proved it's not speculation, it's happening. Follow for updates as we continue to investigate and uncover the full scope of the operation. The truth will not be silenced. Mindy Robinson commenting on the thread. I still feel like this illegitimate regime is going to pull something so they don't have to relinquish power. I go back to the beginning. I laid the foundation for you. Jeremy Raskin, we're not going to certify. Ron Paul discussing the DOD directive. The FEMA employee who was directed by higher-ups to avoid Trump houses, Trump supporters, shows a systemic hatred for people who love the United States. So, this is all happening. You can investigate the thread yourself. It was a disturbing phone call that I had today. And they don't even know. Mike Johnson, Hakeem Jeffries are at each other's throats over which party can truly be trusted to certify the election. Let's take a look. Let's see what Judge Joe Brown had to say about this.
I want to bring, you got the media that is completely out of control, and instead of trying to implement a free speech situation, they're trying to destroy it. I want to bring something to everybody's attention. It's Department of Defense Directive 5240.01. It was implemented by the Biden-Harris administration September 27th, last month, and it authorizes the U.S. Department of Defense on the authority of a representative no higher in rank than a colonel to use deadly force against American citizens. One of the specific categories that is mentioned is dissent or refusal to accept election results. Now, we had an experiment I've been talking about all around this country, and it started 235 years ago when we adopted our Constitution. 233 years ago, we adopted the Bill of Rights. And we have been progressing, except we've got a party right now that wants to tear all of that down. We hear a candidate talking about they want to get rid of the First Amendment because we need a bureau to deal with controlling misinformation. The Nazi Party started that same identical bureau in 1933. 1934, the Nazis started Strength Through Joy. We have that coming up right now. And it's trying to derail something that is the natural outcome of this experiment we engaged in, which is black, white, brown, red, yellow. We all can come together, and we have a common interest because most humans come from a traditional nuclear family, but somebody wants to tear it down. And when somebody wants to tear it down, that means I don't care what your ethnicity is. You have more in common with every other human being on this planet, especially those who are citizens of the United States of America. We can come together and look at this as an opportunity to assert this coming together. I have talked to young black men, young white men, Asians. I've talked to people from all over this country around this state, and they're sick and tired of trying to be put in a position where they can be what they were intended to be, rather than what some sick fool says some delusion is entitling you to cop out and not deal with your responsibilities as a human. So let's build on that and keep these fascists out of office. I will conclude with this. Thank you very much for doing what you're doing right here to make America great again, to put it back on track to deal with this great experiment that nobody else in the world has had the opportunity to conduct.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to go back. I'm going to go back to this point that he made. We got to drive this home.
Now, we had an experiment I've been talking about all around this country, the U.S. Department of Defense, on the authority of a representative no higher in rank than a colonel to use deadly force against American citizens. One of the specific categories that is mentioned is dissent or refusal to accept election results. Now,
there it is. There it is. So the evidence is overwhelming. FEMA's deployment isn't about disaster relief, it's about control. The correlation between these movements and the Department of Defense new directive authorizing force against Americans is impossible to ignore. We're watching the infrastructure for federal overreach being built right before our eyes. So here's what I want you to tell me in the comments. What do you think is the real purpose behind FEMA choosing these specific 6?
Who knows? Oh, I'm not being watched. That was very interesting. I was doing some research today again on just the lineage of the Ashkenazi versus the Sephardic versus the Mizrahi. There used to be another name. I think it was a Masta Arab or something like that. And looking at their lineage and genealogy, and then I got into the Ashini tribe, and then I was into Hiroshima, and then I was into like the fact that they do come from different regions, possibly, but Iran and Turkey being like a prominent place that the Ashkenazi Jews do come from, and then traveled up through Ukraine as well, and anyways, it's very interesting. About 45% of Israel is comprised of Ashkenazi Jews, and the other 55% ish is Sephardic, and that's the breakdown. And then less than 2%, I believe, of the Mizrahi, or whatever you want to call it. I'm going to search that. I don't want to just bastardize it. But the Ashina clan, that's very interesting. And Nazi in the title also, or in the word also doesn't escape me. And Mizrahi, okay, so it's Ashkenazi, Sephardic, and Mizrahi. Okay, I just want to make sure that I get all the tabs down that are not going to confuse me. I don't need that anymore. I got into some rabbit holes again about King James. Not information that I have not shared before, but he wasn't necessarily homosexual, but he was definitely, which again, not a big deal to be bisexual. He had many lovers, but he was also linked to pedophilia as well. And someone that published or had the King James version of the Bible published in 1611. It's very interesting. If people that were devout Christians and followed the King James version of the Bible, I have it. It's literally in my friggin' library. But knowing that information be interesting to people. Before I get into simulation theory and someone's interpretation of it, I wanted to share something that I've shared with people and they've loved it. It's the double slit experiment, and why I believe this to be some kind of a computer program.
Absolutely wild, and may confirm that we're living in a simulation. It was performed by Thomas Young, and it's called the double slit experiment. So basically, if you fire particles at a screen through a split, it will make this clumping pattern, okay? What if you add a second slit? You fire the particles, it makes two clumping patterns. Everybody with me? So if you perform this with a wave, this is what you would expect to see. The density would be in the middle and it would disperse outwards, but it would look similar to the clumping pattern with the most density being in the middle. So now let's do it with the two slits. When you do two slits, as the waves pass, they create their own waves, and the waves interfere with each other at different points. This is called an interference pattern, okay? Particles clump together, waves make an interference pattern. So now let's do it with electrons. As you fire it through, you'll see a similar clumping pattern. So as scientists performed it with two slits, they expected to see two clumping patterns, but they didn't. What they saw was this, the interference pattern. For years, the scientists thought, well, maybe these electrons would collide with each other, and that's what causes this interference pattern. So in the 60s, they modified the experiment where they would only shoot one electron at a time, and it still made the interference pattern. So they wanted to see what was causing this, and so they made an observer. They wanted to record what was happening, and here's what's crazy. With the observer there, the electrons would make two clumping patterns. They would behave the way that they were supposed to. Without the observer, the interference pattern.
But that's a different result to what we had earlier. So here's the last bit of sneakiness that we can play with atoms. Surely now, we're going to get to grips with it. Leave the detector there, but just very quietly go and unplug it. Don't let the atoms know that you're not spying on them. Run the experiment again.
They run it again with the observer unplugged, and it's the same interference pattern. Depending on whether the particles were being observed or not, impacted the way that they would act. Like, how would a particle be aware of this? So the experiment was updated to the delayed choice experiment. They would fire a photon. There would be no observer until the photon goes through the slits. Then the observer would turn on. And here's where it gets absolutely insane. Once the observer was turned on, the photon would act like it had been observed the entire time. It would go back to doing a clumping pattern, switching from wave to particle.
Experiment showed is that even though the electrons started as waves but behaved like particles after being observed, at the moment the decision to observe them was made, the electrons recorded themselves as having passed through the slits as particles. The electrons changed their state by going back in time.
Do you understand what that is saying? They changed their state by going back in time. The scientific definition of that, by the way, is called retrocausality. So if photons from a star came to Earth, let's say that star is 100 million years away, those photons went through a double slit, they would make the wave interference pattern, unless they were being observed. If it was observed, they would make the clumping pattern. Even though for 100 million years it existed as a wave pattern, once you observed it, it through retrocausality goes 100 million years in the past and acts like a particle. This is similar to how rendering works in a video game. A video game engine only renders what you perceive. It's not going to render all of the detail inside of this building until you are there inside the building. It is constantly rendering things as your perception changes. The reason why it does this is so it can save on compute power, but you have the illusion of a complete and total map. The double slit experiment suggests that the same thing may be happening with us. Things only get rendered if you're observing them. So everybody's heard the saying, if a tree falls in the woods but no one's around to hear it, did it make a sound? Well, according to the double slit experiment, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to observe it, does it even exist? Did it even do anything? Pretty trippy, right?
Yep.
This experiment is absolutely wild and may confirm that we're living in it.
Perception is reality. And we're accessing this cosmos via our mind. It's our connection to whatever higher level consciousness being or energy is playing this this video game, whatever it is, computer game. Okay, simulation theory. Tim Pool. Don't agree with everything he shares, and he can be intense, especially when talking about flat Earth. But I'm hoping that, at least the last I checked, he slams flat Earthers quite often. And I would love to go on his show and discuss with him my theories, interpretations of the Earth plane, and show him data. But so far, he doesn't really do that. He doesn't allow for that. He shuts people out before they can even communicate. At least from what I've seen. I haven't seen remotely even a small percentage of his videos, but he is smart on a lot of topics, even though I don't agree with him on several. So let's see what he has to say.
Indistinguishable, especially with something like
This is from BitChute.
Popular. The fact that we can right now, literally in our reality, create these simulations, and we're getting to the point where it's going to be indistinguishable, especially with something like Neuralink, then the likelihood is greater that you're in a simulation than you are not. And that's why a lot of people believe this. But let me give you one thing. So I was thinking about Terminator, right? We've all seen that Skynet goes and just decides to wipe out humanity. And I think that's an absurdity. The idea that we would make an AI and then it would be like, and now I will go to war with humans is stupid. We create an AI, it's going to need humans to perform labor to sustain itself along with its other mechanized components. It would probably seek to control and utilize humans. And in that, the incentive of the AI would actually be to keep humans docile and happy. So you'd probably get the AI would create simulations or entertainment or things to keep humans perpetuating or providing its own services. But in thinking about that, I said, how do you avoid a Terminator scenario in developing AI? If we were to create an AI program and we're trying to get to artificial general intelligence, the point at which it looks and can behave exactly as a human, way beyond human capabilities, but to a human, they wouldn't know the difference. That's a lot of work and a lot of risk. You unleash something like that into human civilization, and you may end up with a sociopath that wants to make everything just corn. You know, the AI's incentive may simply be maximizing, you know, the most efficient path to human gratification. And in the United States, we subsidize corn to an insane degree. We do so much with it that the AI may do something ridiculous and just be like, there's no point in dealing with anything else if the score is corn production generates a, you know, plus 17 result, and then
corn is everything.
It's everything because
corn is God.
It's possible the AI just looks at all things.
Corn and wheat are also big contributors of like this, like the processed food that we're consuming, and making our products sugar laden.
As it is able,
and possibly endocrine disruptors and things like that as well in it.
To analyze and says assigns a value to each based on whether something is a positive or negative reaction for humans. I'm not saying corn is it. I'm saying it could be something as absurd as it just goes, humans love subsidizing and producing this product. And so it just redirects society in that direction. And then before we realize it, we live in crackpot corn reality. But so I was thinking about this, how do you avert evil or broken AI? Well, what I would do is I would create a simulated reality in which each AI iteration exists as a conscious entity beginning with zero knowledge, and it would simulate a human life. This artificial intelligence and all 7 or 8 billion would experience various types of life that it could live. And the AI constructs that are within each individual within this one simulation interacting with each other, each one that is evil, malicious, or insane would be deleted and removed. Each that was studious, industrious, and capable would advance to an android body outside of the simulation. And so if I was seeking to create robots that would serve humanity, an android that will clean my living room or create nuclear energy or run power plants or do good governance, I would not want evil. I would not want sociopathic or fractured. I would want empathetic, studious, intelligent, pragmatic. So I would run all of the iterations of AI through a simulation. Those that are bad, I would delete, just you're gone. And those that are good would advance to live in my kingdom and with me forever.
Really so what do you, here's the problem.
Right now.
Have you ever done bad things?
Define bad, I guess.
Yeah, no, can you? What is evil?
I define evil as those things that are destructive and in furtherance of chaos. That's overly simplistic.
Yeah. I think the problem that I would see with this kind of idea is that what you run into is that all human beings are evil. Even by that, have you ever contributed to chaos and destruction?
I disagree. I think it's oversimplified. All humans have the capability of evil, like yin and yang. Within good, there is evil. Within evil, there is, or I should say, within good, there is the capability of evil. Within evil, there's capability of good. But when I look at the bigger picture of what, evil and good is, I would describe good as things that organize energy.
Can a society grow without tension, pressure? I'm not condoning violence at all, or any of that stuff. But there's natural and man-made events that happen where it creates a lot of trauma, I would say, in people's lives to such a significant degree, and wars and etc. Where by being at like a very low point in their lives, they were able to build beauty, like masterworks, whether it be like regarding music or movies or sculptures or books, literature, or inventions. Like it was people that went through some degree of trauma, I would say, in order to grow. And even with trees, right? Like and plants, when they're inside, they don't grow to be as strong and as big as trees that are planted outside because they're not getting the exposure to even the wind, right? And that's why even on like these simulations that people do, or these mock earths, or whatever you want to call it, that people have in these domes, they put artificial wind there in place for the trees to give them some sort of resistance and resilience develop because of the wind, making them have to be stronger and bigger. And so anyways, I don't know, like I'm probably not making sense with any of that because I really barely slept last night, but yin and yang.
energy into complex systems. And again, that's overly simplistic. It would take a long time if we actually went through all the, to break it down. And I look at evil as things that serve entropic ends. Life is a form of negative entropy, and we can only create more in its wake. Negative entropy only exists so long as we create more entropy as the universe pushes towards chaos. That being said, in the service of good, you can destroy it.
Yeah, like
in the service
fire.
of evil, you can create. Yeah, fire is neutral, but fire can destroy.
Chaotic and destructive, but it can be very good.
It's one of the most important things that humans have ever discovered, how to essentially, I don't want to say produce, but perhaps produce, but to ignite,
allow.
As we're able to then refine elements and develop technology through our ability with combustion.
Can I give you a thought experiment? I think is really interesting on this front because it overlaps quite a bit with ethics, with Christian theology. What is the good and how do we know it? Imagine that through your entire life, you wore a recording device that was able to capture every thought you had that was a moral law or every statement you ever made of moral truth. For example, you're driving through traffic and somebody cuts you off and you say, "What an idiot." And it somehow knows and can translate, okay, people who do X action are bad and wicked. And we established the Bible of Brian. So my own Deuteronomic law, my own Mosaic law. Thus says Brian, this is the good and this is the evil. Now, if you had a super intelligent being that was able to even read my brain states, I'm not a functional material. I don't believe that the brain alone is the mind, but let's assume that it is. And it could read all of my mind and thoughts and look at all of my actions and dispassionately compare me to my own stated law. What would it find? Well, it would find that I've violated every single one of even my own and my laws would be imperfect, but it would find that I've violated even every single one of my own imperfect laws. Now, let's maximize this to all of humanity, and we were to try and come up with some sort of law that the AI is going to compare people to and say, I'm going to delete people who are bad. This is more what I mean.
Yeah, not an AI doing it.
Or not a consciousness.
It's a God.
It's a God.
God, when you die, the God looks at your life chart and says, okay, we've got Brian 7369412. What did he do? He's actually a pretty good dude. He did some bad stuff. I think he stole a bag of chips when he was a teenager, but we don't really care about that. That's he learned his lesson. He went on to be a good man, a family man. He was logical. He was intelligent. I think this is a good guy. We definitely want this entity to work with us and live an experience. And so the bad exists, but a reasonable. If it were me and I was going through a list of various iterations of artificial intelligences, and I saw yours in there, certainly I would see bad things you've done. But the question is, are you just in general going to be a good person? And the answer is yes. Then you get to come live in my, super reality.
Let me address your proposal for AI safety. I think that's what you proposed. In early stages, you're right. AI needs us for manufacturing, for whatever.
I don't really necessarily see what this has to do with simulation theory. And so I'm just going to move on with Joe Rogan and Lex Fridman, even though they might be controlled opposition assets, whether they know it or not. And so I don't sign up to everything that they share, especially regarding the reality of the world. And if you're such a fucking scientist, Lex, get me on your show, or let's talk privately, and I can share with you the information regarding so many different fundamental laws that debunk the globe and the moon landings.
The Joe Rogan experience.
Nope.
Physical mediums in which these simulations could be created. It can be a completely virtual world. The role of consciousness, whether you make.
Interesting. Oh my God, I'm over 2 hours in. Well, I do want to share a bit of game theory.
Problems of this sort pop up everywhere, from nations locked in conflict to roommates doing the dishes. Even game shows have been based around this concept. Figuring out the best strategy can mean the difference between life and death, war and peace, flourishing and the destruction of the planet. And in the mechanics of this game, we may find the very source of one of the most unexpected phenomena in nature: cooperation. On the 3rd of September 1949, an American weather monitoring plane collected air samples over Japan. In those samples, they found traces of radioactive material. The Navy quickly collected and tested rainwater samples from their ships and bases all over the world. They also detected small amounts of cerium-141 and yttrium-91. But these isotopes have half-lives of 1 or 2 months, so they must have been produced recently. And the only place they could have come from was a nuclear explosion. But the US hadn't performed any tests that year, so the only possible conclusion was that the Soviet Union had figured out how to make a nuclear bomb. This was the news the Americans had been dreading. Their military supremacy, achieved through the Manhattan Project, was quickly fading.
This makes the problem of Western Europe and the United States far more serious than it was before, and perhaps makes the imminence of war greater.
Some thought their best course of action was to launch an unprovoked nuclear strike against the Soviets while they were still ahead. In the words of Navy Secretary Matthews, to become aggressors for peace. John von Neumann, the founder of game theory, said, "If you say, why not bomb them tomorrow? I say, why not bomb them today? If you say today at 5 o'clock, I say, why not at 1 o'clock?" Something needed to be done about nuclear weapons, and fast. But what? In 1950, the RAND Corporation, a US-based think tank, was studying this question. And as part of this research, they turned to game theory. That same year, 2 mathematicians at RAND had invented a new game, one which, unbeknownst to them at the time, closely resembled the US-Soviet conflict. This game is now
interesting, though.
Now known as the Prisoner's Dilemma.
Not what I thought it was.
So let's play a game. A banker with a chest full of gold coins invites you and another player to play against each other. You each get 2 choices. You can cooperate or you can defect. If you both cooperate, you each get 3 coins. If one of you cooperates but the other defects, then the one who defected gets 5 coins and the other gets nothing. And if you both defect, then you each get a coin. The goal of the game is simple, to get as many coins as you can. So, what would you do? Suppose your opponent cooperates. Then you could also cooperate and get 3 coins. Or you could defect and get 5 coins instead. So you are better off defecting. But what if your opponent defects instead? Well, you could cooperate and get no coins, or you could defect and at least get 1 coin. So no matter what your opponent does, your best option is always to defect. Now, if your opponent is also rational, they will reach the same conclusion and therefore also defect. As a result, when you both act rationally, you both end up in the suboptimal situation, getting 1 coin each, when you could have gotten 3 instead. In the case of the US and Soviet Union, this led both countries to develop huge nuclear arsenals of tens of thousands of nuclear weapons each, more than enough to destroy each other many times over. But since both countries had nukes, neither could use them. And both countries spent around $10 trillion developing these weapons. Both would have been better off if they had cooperated and agreed not to develop this technology further. But since they both acted in their own best interest, they ended up in a situation where everyone was worse off. The Prisoner's Dilemma is one of the most famous games in game theory. Thousands and thousands of papers have been published on versions of this game. In part, that's because it pops up everywhere. Impalas, living in between African woodlands and savannas, are prone to catching ticks, which can lead to infectious diseases, paralysis, even death. So it's important for impalas to remove ticks, and they do this by grooming. But they can't reach all the spots on their bodies, and therefore they need another impala to groom them. Now, grooming someone else comes at a cost. It costs saliva, electrolytes, time, and attention, all vital resources under the hot African sun, where a predator could strike at any moment. So for the other impala, it would be best not to pay this cost. But then again, it too will need help grooming. So all impalas face a choice. Should they groom each other or not? In other words, should they cooperate or defect? Well, if they only interact once, then the rational solution is always to defect. That other Impala is never going to help you, so why bother? But the thing about a lot of problems is that they're not a single prisoner's dilemma. Impalas see each other day after day, and the same situation keeps happening over and over again. So that changes the problem. Because instead of playing the prisoner's dilemma just once, you're now playing it many, many times. And if I defect now, then my opponent will know that I defected, and they can use that against me in the future. So, what is the best strategy in this repeated game? That is what Robert Axelrod, a political scientist, wanted to find out. So in 1980, he decided to hold a computer tournament.
He invited some of the world's leading game theorists from many different subjects to submit computer programs that would play each other.
Axelrod called these programs strategies. Each strategy would face off against every other strategy and against a copy of itself. And each matchup would go for 200 rounds. That's important, and we'll come back to it. Now, Axelrod used points instead of coins, but the payoffs were the same. The goal of the tournament was to win as many points as possible. And in the end, the whole tournament was repeated 5 times over to ensure the success was robust and not just a fluke. Axelrod gave an example of a simple strategy. It would start each game by cooperating and only defect after its opponent had defected twice in a row. In total, Axelrod received 14 strategies, and he added a 15th called random, which just randomly cooperates or defects 50% of the time. All strategies were loaded onto a single computer where they faced off against each other. One of the strategies was called Friedman. It starts off by cooperating, but if its opponent defects just once, it will keep defecting for the remainder of the game. Another strategy was called Joss. It also starts by cooperating, but then it just copies what the other player did on the last move. Then around 10% of the time, Joss gets sneaky and defects. There was also a rather elaborate strategy called Grasscamp. This strategy works the same as Joss, but instead of defecting probabilistically, Grasscamp defects in the 50th round to try and probe the strategy of its opponent and see if it can take advantage of any weaknesses. The most elaborate strategy was Name Withheld, with 77 lines of code. After all the games were played, the results were tallied up and the leaderboard established.
The crazy thing was that the simplest program ended up winning, a program that came to be called Tit for Tat.
Tit for Tat starts by cooperating, and then it copies exactly what its opponent did in the last move. So it would follow cooperation with cooperation and defection with defection. But only once. If its opponent goes back to cooperating, so does Tit for Tat. When Tit for Tat played against Friedman, both started by cooperating, and they kept cooperating, both ending up with perfect scores for complete cooperation. When Tit for Tat played against Joss, they too started by cooperating, but then on the 6th move, Joss defected. This sparked a series of back and forth defections, a sort of echo effect.
Okay, so now you've got this alternating thing, which will remind you of some of the politics of the world today, where we have to do something to you because of what you did to us. And then when this weird program throws in a second unprovoked defection, now it's really bad, because now both programs are going to defect on each other for the rest of the game. And that's also like some of the things that we're seeing in politics today and in international relations.
As a result of these mutual retaliations, both Tit for Tat and Joss did poorly. But because Tit for Tat managed to cooperate with enough other strategies, it still won the tournament. We're being joined.
Hey, my God, there's Professor Axelrod.
Hey, there's Stephen Schwartz.
Whoa, what a treat this is.
And I imagined initially it'd be sort of like computer chess, where you need a pretty complicated program to play a sophisticated game. But in fact, it was not like that at all. It was the simplest strategy that did the best. So I analyzed how that happened.
Axelrod found that all the best performing strategies, including Tit for Tat, shared 4 qualities. First, they were all nice, which just means they are not the first to defect. So Tit for Tat is a nice strategy. It can defect, but only in retaliation. The opposite of nice is nasty. It's a strategy that defects first. So Joss is nasty. Out of the 15 strategies in the tournament, 8 were nice and 7 nasty. The top 8 strategies were all nice, and even the worst performing nice strategy still far outscored the best performing nasty one. The second important quality was being forgiving. A forgiving strategy is one that can retaliate, but it doesn't hold a grudge. So tit for tat is a forgiving strategy. It retaliates when its opponent defects, but it doesn't let defections from before the last round influence its current decisions. Friedman, on the other hand, is maximally unforgiving.
After the first defection, just from the opponent would defect for the rest of the game. Okay, that's it. No mercy. And that might feel good to do, but it doesn't end up working out well in the long run.
This conclusion, that it pays to be nice and forgiving, came as a shock to the experts. Many had tried to be tricky and create subtle, nasty strategies to beat their opponent and eke out an advantage. But they all failed. Instead, in this tournament, nice guys finished first. Now, tit for tat is quite forgiving, but it's possible to be even more forgiving. Axelrod's sample strategy only defects after its opponent defected twice in a row. It was tit for 2 tats. Now, that might sound overly generous, but when Axelrod ran the numbers, he found that if anyone had submitted the sample strategy, they would have won the tournament.
I mean, it's so clever. There's so many layers to this story. After Axelrod published his analysis of what happened, or circulated it among these game theorists, he said, now that we all know what worked well, let's try again.
So he announced a second tournament where everything would be the same except for one change, the number of rounds per game. See, in the first tournament, each game lasted precisely 200 rounds. And that is important, because if you know when the last round is, then there's no reason to cooperate in that round. So you're better off defecting. Of course, your opponent should reason the same, and so they should also defect in the last round. But if you both anticipate defection in the last round, then there's no reason for you to cooperate in the second to last round, or the round before that, or before that, and so on all the way to the very first round.
And so in Axelrod's tournament, it was a very important thing that the players didn't know exactly how long they were going to be playing. They knew on average it would be 200 rounds, but there was a random number generator that prevented them from knowing with certainty.
Yeah, if you're not sure when it ends, then you have to kind of keep cooperating because it might keep going and you might need them on your side.
That is literally this cosmos, this Earth that we're experiencing. Like, this is exactly how I see it. Like this kind of like the game theory that's being utilized. Like, I think being nice and forgiving it's a key criteria, because we're not escaping this Earth plane, this matrix, whatever you want to call it. We're not like until our energy is transferred when these avatars pass away. But yeah, just like when someone plays a video game character, as soon as they turn the game off, they're back in reality. Their reality, it's the same concept.
Yeah. For this second tournament, Axelrod received 62 entries and again added random. The contestants had gotten the results and analysis from the first tournament and could use this information to their advantage. This created 2 camps. Some thought that clearly being nice and forgiving were winning qualities, so they submitted nice and forgiving strategies. One even submitted tit for 2 tats. The second camp anticipated that others would be nice and extra forgiving, and therefore they submitted nasty strategies to try to take advantage of those that were extra forgiving. One such strategy was called Tester. It would defect on the first move to see how its opponent reacted. If it retaliated, Tester would apologize and play tit for tat for the remainder of the game. If it didn't retaliate, Tester would defect every other move after that. But again, being nasty didn't pay.
And once again, tit for tat was the most effective.
Nice strategies again did much better. In the top 15, only 1 was not nice. Similarly, in the bottom 15, only 1 was not nasty. After the second tournament, Axelrod identified the other qualities that distinguish the better performing strategies. The third is being retaliatory, which means if your opponent defects, strike back immediately. Don't be a pushover. Always cooperate is a total pushover, and so it's very easy to take advantage of. Tit for tat, on the other hand, is very hard to take advantage of. The last quality that Axelrod identified is being clear.
Programs that were too opaque, that were too similar to a random program. You couldn't figure them out because they were so complicated. It was very hard to establish any pattern of trust with a program like that because you couldn't figure out what it was doing. Not you. I mean, the other programs it was playing couldn't figure them out. And so they would end up more or less defaulting to thinking every turn is like the last time I'm going to see you, so I might as well defect. What to me is mind-blowing about this is that these four principles, being nice, forgiving, provocable, and clear, is a lot like the morality that has evolved around the world that is often summarized as an eye for an eye. It's not Christianity, by the way. It's not turn the other cheek philosophy. It's some older philosophy.
What's interesting is that while Tit for Two Tats would have won the first tournament, it only came 24th in the second tournament. This highlights an important fact. In the repeated prisoner's dilemma, there is no single best strategy. The strategy that performs best always depends on the other strategies it's interacting with. For example, if you put Tit for Tat in an environment with only the ultimate bullies of always defect, then Tit for Tat comes in last.
I wanted to see whether, for example, the Tit for Tat did well because it did well with really stupid rules that didn't do well at all themselves, that basically it took advantage of people.
So he ran a simulation where successful strategies in one generation would see their numbers grow and unsuccessful ones would see their numbers drop. In this simulation, the worst performing strategies quickly shrink and go extinct, while the top performing strategies become more common. Harrington, the only nasty strategy in the top 15, first grew quickly, but then as the strategies it was preying on went extinct, Harrington's numbers also quickly dropped. This shows a main benefit of this simulation because it tests how well a strategy does with other successful strategies. After 1,000 generations, the proportions are mostly stable, and only nice strategies survive. Again, Tit for Tat comes out on top, representing 14.5% of the total population. Now, this process may sound similar to evolution, but there is a subtle difference, which is that in this case there are no mutations, so it's actually an ecological simulation. But what if the world you started in was different?
Imagine a world that is a really nasty place to live, more or less populated with players that always defect. Except there's a little cluster of tit-for-tat players that live in some kind of nucleus. And they get to play with each other a lot because they're geographically sequestered. They will start building up a lot of points, and also, because that translates into offspring, they'll start to take over the population. So, in fact, Axelrod showed that a little island of cooperation can emerge and spread, and eventually will take over the world, which is fantastic. How can cooperation emerge in a population of players who are self-interested, who are not trying to be good because they're good-hearted? You don't have to be altruistic.
There's people that know this game exists that can absolutely manipulate us to their advantage. And because cooperation, being nice and stuff like that, it's like with what we're doing, like even with the pandemic response and these possible cyber attacks that are possibly being created by said organizations that I've talked about before. But again, WEF also involved in that, and yeah, just blissfully unaware of things like replacement migration and things like that.
You could be looking out for
going into wars. Anyway.
Number one for yourself and your own interests, and yet cooperation can still emerge.
Some argue that this could explain how we went from a world full of completely selfish organisms, where every organism only cared about themselves, to one where cooperation emerged and flourished. From impalas to fish cleaning sharks. Many life forms experience conflicts similar to the prisoner's dilemma, but because they don't interact just once, both can be better off by cooperating. And this doesn't require trust or conscious thought either, because the strategy could be encoded in DNA. As long as it performs better than the other strategies, it can take over a population. Axelrod's insights were applied to areas like evolutionary biology and international conflicts. But there was one aspect that his original tournaments didn't cover. What happens if there is a little bit of random error in the game, some noise in the system? For example, one player tries to cooperate, but it comes across as a defection. Little errors like this happen in the real world all the time. Like in 1983, the Soviet satellite-based early warning system detected the launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile from the US. But the US hadn't launched anything. The Soviet system had confused sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds with a ballistic missile. Thankfully, Stanislav Petrov, the Soviet officer on duty, dismissed the alarm. But this example shows the potential costs of a signal error and the importance of studying the effects of noise on those strategies.
The word game sounds like it's a children's game, or, there's something, a misnomer maybe in calling it game theory, because these are life and death matters, obviously. And as you mentioned that this came up in the Cold War, I mean, it could actually be life and death of the whole planet. We could annihilate human civilization. So these are not games in any kind of trivial sense. It's just the term that is used by mathematicians and theorists.
When tit for tat plays against itself in a noisy environment, both start off by cooperating. But if a single cooperation is perceived as a defection, then the other tit for tat retaliates, and it sets off a chain of alternating retaliations. And if another cooperation is perceived as a defection, then the rest of the game is constant mutual defection. Therefore, in the long run, both would only get a third of the points they would get in a perfect environment. Tit for tat goes from performing very well to performing poorly. So how do you solve this? Well, you need a reliable way to break out of these echo effects. And one way to do this is by playing tit for tat, but with around 10% more forgiveness. So instead of retaliating after every defection, you only retaliate around 9 out of every 10 times. This helps you break out of those echoes while still being retaliatory enough to not be taken advantage of.
And so we also ran the tournament with noise and generosity. And that did quite well. My favorite example is tit for tat does really well, but it could never do better than the player it's playing with.
I mean, think about it. By design, all they can do is lose or draw. And yet, when the results of all interactions are tallied up, they come out ahead of all other strategies. Similarly, always defect can never lose a game. It can only draw or win. But overall, it performs extremely poorly. This highlights a common misconception. Because for many people, when they think about winning, they think they need to beat the other person. In games like chess or poker, this is true, since one person's gain is necessarily another person's loss. So these games are zero-sum. But most of life is not zero-sum. To win, you don't need to get your reward from the other player. Instead, you can get it from the banker. Only in real life, the banker is the world. It is literally everything around you. It is just up to us to find those win-win situations and then work together to unlock those rewards. Cooperation pays, even among rivals. From 1950 to 1986, the US and Soviet Union had trouble cooperating, and both kept developing nukes. But then, from the late 80s onwards, they started reducing their nuclear stockpiles. They too had learned how to resolve conflict. Rather than making an agreement to abolish all nuclear arms at once and essentially turning it into a single prisoner's dilemma, they would disarm slowly, a small number of nukes each year. And then they'd check each other to see that they had both cooperated, and then repeat the year after, and the year after that, all along checking to ensure mutual cooperation. In the more than 40 years since Axelrod's tournaments, researchers have continued to study which strategies perform best in a variety of environments. In doing so, they varied everything from payoff structures to strategies to errors and more. Some even allowed the strategies to mutate. While tit for tat or generous tit for tat doesn't always come out on top, Axelrod's main takeaways still hold. Be nice, forgiving, but don't be a pushover. Can I ask you, why did Anatole Rappaport submit tit for tat?
Well, the reason was because I asked him to. and he wrote saying, yeah, I'm going to do that, but I just want to be clear that I'm not sure that this is really such a good idea. He was a peace researcher, and I think his own inclinations were to be much more forgiving and maybe and not be so provocable.
What I find fascinating is that one of the main things that sets life apart from non-living things is that life gets to make decisions. We get to make choices that don't only change our future, but also the future of those we interact with. See, in the short term, it is often the environment that shapes the player, that determines who does well. But in the long run, it is the players that shape the environment. So let's play a game, the game of life. And make your choices wisely, because their impact may reach further than you think.
That was great. Anyway, long video yet again. But on that note, I will leave it at that. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.